Hello and welcome to our talk on navigating holiday challenges. So what I'm going to talk about in this evening is some things that we can do proactively to help us ensure that we have a calmer, happier holiday. And we're going to talk about something that struck me, which is what I call potholes, and how do we navigate past them. We're going to look at how we can set some boundaries with our children during the holiday season. And something we don't often think about is communicating with our extended family and friends ahead of the holiday and during the holidays to try and help things go along more smoothly. And then something I feel very strongly about, which is prioritizing self-care. We get so busy and hectic getting everything together that I think we often forget to actually put self-care on the list. And we're going to talk about that. So I don't know if it's just me, but when I come up on the holidays, this is kind of what I feel like. I really feel like I'm walking on eggs. I'm trying to spread myself out to keep everything calm. I don't want blow-ups. I don't want issues. I want my child to show up the way I'd like them to show up for myself and for my family and for our extended family and friends. And it's a heavy burden to carry as I go through the holiday season very often. And we can get so caught up on this. And what happens is sometimes when I get to the end of the holidays, I feel like I'm just left with broken eggshells. Somebody blew up, somebody had a fit, somebody stormed out. Questions were asked that triggered my child, and it went astray. And so what I had to think about is how can I get out of this mode of feeling like I'm constantly on eggshells and risking breaking and having nothing but destruction around me. And as I thought about it, I came to this idea, this thought about potholes. And it was really this image that brought it home to me. Because when I looked at this picture, I saw, well, I see a couple and the car was driving along. There was obviously this enormous hole in the road and the car fell into it. And now they've gotten out and they're like, oh my gosh, there was a pothole here. Oh my gosh, our car's fallen into it. Now what do we do? And so they're already in the pothole and trying to figure out what happened. And then there's probably a, why didn't you see it? Well, you should have seen it. Well, a little bit of finger pointing that can frequently happen. And I thought, as the more I thought about it, it was like, well, wait a minute. I really think we can see the potholes that are likely to come up as we're planning a holiday event. Right? I think this is something we oftentimes can see in advance, but we don't necessarily stop and think about it and think, well, what could we do about it rather than just driving into it and getting upset and how do we deal with it now and who's going to call the tow truck? So, although holidays are really hard when we have someone struggling with substance use, a lot of the time we already know what the potholes are that are out there. And with a little bit of work, in advance, which is what we're going to be talking about, we can put signs up. We can put things that prevent the car from actually falling into the pothole and create a happier holiday season for ourselves. And the other thing that I tend to forget about is that my child is anxious. It's not just me that's anxious coming into the holidays and wanting everything to go a particular way. They're actually experiencing tremendous anxiety very often. Are they going to be bored at the holiday event? Are they going to be humiliated by something that happens? Are they going to get into an argument with somebody? Are they going to embarrass their parents? Are they going to feel a need to use while they're there because they're so stressed? Are they going to be trapped and not have a way out? Right? All these things swirl around in our children's head, making them much more likely to be triggered and likely to struggle at a family event. So I've come to, in thinking about this and thinking about potholes and thinking about what we can do in advance, I've really come to kind of a picture of 6 steps to getting to closer to holiday harmony. And what are those 6 steps? And these are the things I'm going to talk about this evening. I'm going to talk about planning around those potholes. We probably already know where they are. So what can we do with that knowledge? I'm going to talk about the fact that we have a lot of emotions that very often control our brain and our reactivity and make us more reactive. Anxiety is a big one, and I'm going to use that as an example about talking about checking in with our emotions. And we're going to look at, well, our child is anxious too. Our child has their own concerns. What could we do to help prepare them for the event that's coming up? And then we all have the challenge of the relatives and the friends. Who is supportive? Who's not? Who's likely to cause a problem? Who's so angry about what's going on that you're not sure how the event's going to go? And we're going to take a look at what we can do about that. And we're also going to look at how we might ask for cooperation. And as I said, the sixth step to holiday harmony is prioritizing our own self-care. So with that, we're going to jump into number one, which is plan around the potholes. All right. So how do we do that? What does that mean? Well, that means I've got to think about what I want for the holiday. And that's a little bit different than saying, how do I think the holiday is going to go? Or what is my ideal holiday? Because the happy holiday scenes that we see on TV so often, they're on TV for a reason, because they want to give us hope, but it's not necessarily how our own holiday season is going to go. So thinking about what is it that I want, what's most important for me to have happen during the holiday? What do I want to try and prioritize? Really important, because there's a lot of stuff out there, and the reality is we can probably only deal with one or two priorities that we want to try and make part of the experience for the holiday. I don't say success because we can't guarantee success, right? We can only try and create the right situation and motivation and hope that success follows. Something else as we prepare for these holiday potholes is how am I feeling? Because my emotions are going to drive my patience, my resilience, my reactivity, my emotions. So being aware and in touch with the feelings that are bubbling up inside of us or that we're holding on to, is a really important part of being able to make the holiday season go more smoothly for ourselves and for everybody else. Thinking about what problems could come up, how are we going to handle it, and thinking that it's not just us. One of the things that's taken me a long time to really understand is very often, I was trying to do everything myself and make everything go perfectly myself, manage my child, manage the family, manage the event, get myself through the event. And in reality, there are other resources, people, places, and things that we could bring in to help us. So thinking about who's around who could be helpful to me. What do I mean by that? Well, what's a goal for my holiday? Here's an example. It might be to have my son present, sober, not using, and not have conflict with his uncle. Because I'm really anxious because last year was a disaster. He stormed out because his uncle was just calling him a loser for using drugs. And his uncle was on at me for being an enabler and not being tough enough on him. Right? So this is one of the potholes. I'm anxious. And the pothole is having a conflict with his uncle. Right? All right. So what could I do about that? How do I deal with that? Well, if we think about it beforehand, the reality is that we're going to see a lot more possible ways to handle it. I could tell my son not to come. I could tell the uncle not to come. I could ply the uncle with alcohol because when he drinks a lot, he gets really quiet and then he falls asleep in the chair and he's not likely to bother anyone. I'm not saying these are good things to do, but I'm saying I could brainstorm a lot of possible things that I could do in advance. And I can think about what I have to help me as I try to deal with this particular pothole of the conflict between his uncle and my son. I have my inner circle support group. I have all the other parents in that who understand what the challenges that I'm facing, and they've come up with their own creative solutions. They might give me some new ideas. I have my sister Susan, who said she'd be willing to keep an eye on his uncle. Oh, that's really good. Maybe I could have someone who's going to be at the event who's going to help run interference or keep them apart. And I have my husband who actually said he'd help with setting up and hosting. What's that? That's a resource that's going to take some of the weight of making this event go well off my shoulders. Now it's not all on me, and I haven't just, the guests aren't walking in the door, and all of a sudden there's a blow up. I'm starting to get in front of it and head it off. What are some other potholes I might think about? What is my expectation for my child? They might or might not show up sober. They might decide they're not going to go to the family event. Now, what do I do? How do I handle this? Preparing ahead of time, thinking ahead of time of what those potholes are, gives us a lot of power to see what we can do about creating a solution, a way to handle it, a way to head off what was last year a disaster, right? I said that last year, my son and his uncle got into a huge fight, and my son stormed off, and the uncle was so upset he started berating me for being an enabler and a poor parent, right? And I certainly didn't enjoy the holiday event, and neither did any of the guests who saw what went on. We talked about anxiety, right? And I said that Sister Susan, well, maybe Sister Susan, instead of looking after the uncle, would be willing to take over hostessing duties while I take a break if I start to get anxious and overwhelmed and stressed. And if I'm thinking in advance about this scenario, how are the friends and relatives going to react? Well, the reality is most of them are going to be fine. They've seen this movie before in our family. They don't like it, but they're not going to get involved. And that's okay. So maybe it's really only his uncle that I have to think about doing something with ahead of time. And then the last part, which is, what does self-care look like for me? How do I make sure that it's a scheduled event, just like putting out the tablecloth and ordering the food and inviting the people and checking who's agreed that they're actually going to come and what time they're going to show up and making sure there's parking, or it's going to be at a restaurant, making sure everybody's going to get there on time and the chairs are comfortable and the menus works, right? I have to schedule self-care time in there or I'm going to forget to do it. And that self-care time should be spent doing things that are going to reset my emotions and my feelings. And we'll talk more about that a little bit later on. All right. So tip number one, think in advance about what the possible potholes are. And then there are things we can do to develop a plan. Tip number two for harmonious holiday is checking in with your emotions. And the first and foremost, and the trick I use for checking in with my emotions is I use a 0 to 10 scale. And 0 means I am completely calm. I'm not feeling the anger. I'm not feeling the anxiety. I'm not feeling the dread. I'm not feeling the depression. And 10, it's the worst intensity it's ever been, right? So identify the emotion that's fluttering in your body, running around your brain. Score it from 0 to 10. And anything over a 5, urgent, pay attention to it. I talk about this a lot in other things that I do, right? We have our executive functioning brain, the front part of our brain, and we have the back part of our brain, which is known as the primitive part of the brain. And the primitive part of the brain is there to protect us, to keep us alive. And when that part of our brain is activated, we're in what's called fight or flight mode. And we're not looking for lots of different options. We're going to grab the first thing that's going to make us feel safe, and we're going to do that. And it could be to disappear into our room and shut the door. It could be to start yelling. It could be to storm out. But it's going to be whatever we feel that it's going to give us an immediate feeling of being protected. So we want to check our emotion, 0 to 10, find the number, and then figure out what you need to do about it to get it from a 7 to a 4, right? Plan ahead for what makes you anxious and how it'll be handled. So you're really anxious. Okay, what is the thing that's making me so anxious? Oh my God, what if my son shows up high to the family event again? Well, instead of getting to the event and going, I can't believe he showed up high, because we've thought about it in advance, maybe we talk to his father and let his father remind him that although we love him, if he turns up high, he's going to have to leave. We have an action and we have somebody who's going to help us. And the minute we have that thought, I'm going to go from a 7 to a 3 because I have a plan for dealing with the thing that is making me so anxious. So my anxiety is going to go down, no question. I highly encourage you to give this a try. To the question of what if your son won't go to the event, to a family event, because you know this is a possible pothole in advance, right? Now you can plan in advance for what to do. I had a parent once who had struggled with her son. She wanted to go somewhere. The son was supposed to go with her, but she wasn't sure that the son wouldn't bail at the last minute. And she and I worked together and she developed a backup plan. She developed a plan to talk to her son ahead of time about going with her and about what would happen if he made the decision not to go. And in that case, she had another relative step in and the son had to go and stay with that other relative while she went and did. So she wasn't canceling on where she needed to go, but she had a plan in place for if her son refused to go. And the end of that story is that the son actually did refuse to go, and the backup plan was put in place. And afterwards, he told her he really regretted that he'd made the decision not to show up and go with her. But she was able to go and do what she was trying to do because she had a plan in place to deal with him and because she wasn't going to leave him home alone. So check in with your emotions, check that anxiety level. Something else that's going to help us is we have to remind ourselves that we cannot actually control their behavior. And so understanding that things may go wrong, that they may show up and they may have an alcoholic, they may show up, they may say, I won't touch a drop. And then you see them with a glass of wine in their hand. It could happen. And so having a plan in mind ahead of time and engaging somebody to help you, or having somebody you can text if you start to feel your anxiety ratcheting up during the event, really important and powerful. All right, let's move on to tip number 3, which is preparing your child for the event. Ahead of time, you're going to want to identify what's the expectation that you have for your child. Is it around whether they're using or not during the event, whether they disrupt the mood of the event, whether they're going to show up or not show up? Expectation around how long they're going to be there. Expectation around what they share about what's actually going on in their life. Because a lot of times they're not going to be willing to say, well, I sit in my room and use drugs all day long and not really doing much with my life right now, right? So you're going to want to help identify where you think the issues are going to be, the questions that they're going to have. And you're going to want to put in place a plan, like the example of the mother I gave you. She thought her son might at the last minute bail out of the trip. She did not want him staying home alone. So she created a plan, told him what was expected, communicated it really simply and clearly. Here's your choice. I would love you to go with me. I would love you to show up sober. But if that's not something you're able to do, here's what's going to happen instead. And it is your choice. I'm going to ask my colleague, Jack, to help me with reading a little example. All right. Hey, son, I want to discuss our holiday gathering with you because this year we've decided to make it an alcohol-free event.
Why? I was looking forward to having some wine. I don't really see a problem with it.
Yeah, I understand your perspective, but our decision's based on wanting to create a safe and comfortable environment for everyone, especially considering the past concerns we've had about alcohol consumption.
I really think you're overreacting. I can handle my drinking.
I respect that you feel in control, but we've noticed instances where alcohol has led to challenging situations. And our goal is to ensure a peaceful and enjoyable time for all. So if you decide not to support this choice, you can choose not to participate in the event.
I don't really agree with it, but I guess we'll have to go along.
So what did we do here in this little back and forth? I set out what the expectation was, and yet I honored Jack's ability to decide not to participate. So he had the choice. And this goes a really long way to heading off a lot of conflict that we often experience. This really allows him to see that it's his decision as to how he wants to show up at the event and whether he's going to respect what's being asked of him. Now, the first time we try this, our children are probably going to try to push the boundary and the limit. But as we get more and more used to setting things up like this and allowing them to have their choices and following through, right? I have a plan in place. If he does this, I've already talked to somebody else at the party who's going to help me and make sure that he has to leave. Once he experiences that this is really going to happen, our children very quickly think more seriously about whether or not they're going to meet expectations that are being set. And they're going to recognize it's their choice. Tip number 4 is the relatives and the friends. Thinking in advance how you're going to handle the questions about what's going on with your child and whether there are topics that you'd like to have avoided is really important. It's important to help you get through the event. It's important for your child who may or may not feel comfortable having aspects of their life exposed at the event. This can be a huge source of anxiety for our children about whether they're going to show up or whether they decide they've got to have a little bit of courage by using before they turn up. And maybe mom won't notice, or maybe dad won't notice, and I'll be able to get by because I'm really scared inside about what I'm going to be called on to say. And again, it comes back to let's find a friend. Find somebody in the group of people who are going to be there who you can talk to ahead of time and say, can you help? Either by keeping an eye on what's going on, or cozying up to the person who's most likely to ask the wrong question, or being there for our son so that he can get through if there's a possible issue that crops up. For example, our son had to leave early. What are we going to share with the relatives and friends? Well, we may want to say, he blew it. He showed up high, or he blew it. He was drinking while he was here and we told him he couldn't. Or maybe we just want to say our son left early. He wasn't feeling able to participate in the event. We're sorry he left, and we're going to check in with him a little later. The relatives and friends don't need to know everything. And if you're prepared ahead of time with what to say, if you practice it in front of the mirror, it helps get us through the event and keep everything on an even keel. All right. Tip number 5 is if you have somebody who's problematic, ask for cooperation. Okay, so we have the uncle, right, who last year laid into our son for being an addict and a loser, and laid into me for being an enabler. Let's think about how we could approach them ahead of time and ask for their cooperation to make this event a happy one for everybody. And there are 3 keys to doing that. And then I'm going to ask Jack to help us with a little read a role play to give you an example of how that plays out. First is to acknowledge how they feel about your child. They are angry at your child for their behavior or what they're doing. Acknowledge that. Let them be heard and understood. Too often, my knee-jerk reaction would be, well, you don't need to be. It's none of your business. Don't get in their face. Why do you think this way? I'm the one who has to live with it. You don't understand what I'm going through. I wasn't trying to enable. I'm trying to really make changes, and you don't understand. So, that's not going to go anywhere positive. I've tried it. Doesn't go anywhere positive. Ask them to be respectful during the event. We're here, we're gathered as a family. Now's not the time to go after all the things that we think are wrong. And maybe I could share a little bit about what I'm doing and how I'm trying to handle what they're seeing as the issue with our child. And then during the event, you want to monitor the interactions, bring in a friend, get some help. So, Jack, I understand your concerns about his behavior, especially how he speaks to me. It's challenging.
You know, it's upsetting to see him being so disrespectful. I don't think it's acceptable.
I appreciate your perspective, but during the party, I'd like everybody to interact together respectfully so that we can keep a positive environment for everyone.
I can try, but it's hard when he acts out.
I know, I feel the same way. But we are seeking professional support, so we're better, and we're trying to set clearer boundaries at home. And it's taking time, and your patience and help mean a lot to me.
I want to support you, and I'll do my best to stay calm.
Thank you, because your support's really important as we try and navigate this, right? So you try and co-opt them in to the goal of keeping the party together and the family together. You recognize that they still have issues and concerns, and maybe you offer them time to air that before or after, but not during, right? And again, you're trying to set this up ahead of time. And having somebody else who's not you during the party, who knows this is a potential issue, who can help you manage it, is really takes a lot of weight off your shoulders. All right. So tip number 6 is prioritize self-care. I was terrible. I heard everybody talking about self-care, 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 and I'm like, I'll get to that as soon as I deal with the crisis that's in front of me. But the problem was that as I was trying to deal with the crisis in front of me, I was stressed, I was anxious, I was angry, I was frustrated, I was frightened. And I've talked earlier about that primitive brain. I wasn't thinking clearly. I couldn't see there might be multiple ways to deal with a crisis. I grabbed onto the first thing that made me feel good. If it was telling my son to get out and never darken my door, or if it was to tell the uncle that he didn't know what he was talking about, or if it was just to say, why does nobody understand what I'm going through? And why is everybody making this so hard for me? And I was missing all different kinds of options for handling the situation much more calmly and effectively. So now I understand, and I understand what self-care is. People used to hand out sheets of things you could do, play a card game, read a book, drink hot chocolate, right? There's lots of things on it. But the light bulb had to go on for me to say, no, it's not about what I did, but it's about how I felt doing it. If I did something that completely absorbed my brain, so I stopped thinking about what was the holiday was going to come up, and I stopped worrying about what my child might do or what might happen, my brain actually slowed down and refreshed. And so it's about what could I do that helped me to feel refreshed, relaxed, and renewed. And if that's talking to a friend, weeding a garden, or getting a mani-pedi, it's whatever does it for you as the individual. Really, really important because it allows us to go. Remember, we talked about the anxiety 0 to 10. If you're up here at a 7 or higher, self-care is critical to get you down to a 3 or 4. And the minute you get into that zone, you start to see many more options, many more things that you can do. So I want to thank you all for being here. I really appreciate you being here and giving me your time and attention.